Hey, good evening, everyone. Thank you on behalf of SD57 for joining us this evening for our live stream event around our draft annual budget. I would like to acknowledge the territory that we were on by respectfully acknowledging the unceded ancestral territories of the Katlie Tene, on whose land we live, work, and play. We also service students and families in the traditional territories of the McLeod Lake Indian Band in Mackenzie and the Simpcw First Nation in the Robson Valley. The intention of this meeting is to provide some background and feedback around the budget decisions that SD57 has in front of us and the recommendations that staff will be making to our Board of Trustees. As many of you are aware, we are facing a deficit this year, and we will begin by getting into the slides, but first I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jamil Aziz. I am the Superintendent of Schools here for SD57, newly appointed. This is my fourth week in the position. And to my right is Linda Minibariat, who is our Acting Secretary Treasurer and has been providing service to SD57 over the last school year. So we're going to begin by sharing our screens and the slides for information, and hopefully you will be able to follow along and what we're presenting makes good sense to you. So SD57 is currently in a bit of a difficult position. We have to address a structural deficit of $2 million. And what structural deficit means is that essentially our current operational costs exceed our current supplies of income and grants from government. And if we continue to just operate the district the way we have traditionally operated it, we would have to accrue $2 million annually and probably even more so as inflationary costs continue. So essentially, we cannot continue to run the school district in the way that we have, certainly this last year and prior, because the costs have outweighed the funding that we receive. All public boards in BC are required to present a balanced budget to the Ministry of Education and Childcare annually, and that has to be done by our Board of Trustees by the end of June. And so we are bringing recommendations forward based on our own analysis, based on public feedback that we receive, and engagement with staff, partner groups, and stakeholders. So the recommendations to the boards have been attempted to be guided by the following items, and we really want to make sure that these are the lenses that we have looked at any of our decisions around. Number one, we have looked at reductions that will have the least impact on programs and students. Number two, we have looked at niceties that were added to our system over more recent years that we can no longer afford. Number three, we had a lens ensuring that the reductions are minimized for the district's lowest wage earners. We know for many of our employees that the economic times are creating some hardship. We know that people are having to look at their own home and personal budgets, and we certainly didn't want to create additional challenges for our district employees, and certainly not for our lowest wage earners across the district. And then number four, and not necessarily these are in order, we really wanted to work to create greater equity across SD57 schools and make sure that we have equal access to technology and all of the improvements that our education system has. All right, so in our slide around our historical and projected student enrollment, you can see that we have been at approximately 13,000 over the last number of years. We had a bit of a drop below that in 2021, but our projections moving forward have us at approximately 13,000, as high as 13,200. So nothing dramatic in terms of student enrollment increase or decrease. Although the Prince George area is expecting increased population, it is not necessarily an increase in the school age population. And so that is why the stability for our school system is what we project over the coming years. You can see in this pie chart here that we have broken down for you the annual budget by fund. The greatest portion, of course, is the operating fund, where the revenue is more general in nature and we have some flexibility in our allocations. That makes up 85% or 179,000 plus of our funded allowance. Special purpose funds are 10% of our overall budget at approximately 20,500,000, and our capital funds are just below $10 million at 9.8, and those grants are received for construction of new schools or building upgrades or equipment purchases. And our special purpose funds, going back to that, were for targeted programs like Indigenous education, special education, and special purpose funds cannot be moved from one account area to another. So they have to stay within the confines of the targeted dollars that they were provided for. At this time, I'm going to hand things over to our Secretary Treasurer, Linda Minnie-Barriott, who to take you through some of the numbers in more detail.
Thanks, Jamil. Operating revenues for, can we make one change? Thank you, Superintendent Aziz. Operating revenues for 2024 projected at 178 million. 175 million of that is the Ministry of Education and Childcare operating grant, which makes up 98% of our operating funding. The operating grant amount is driven mainly by student enrollment numbers and by the number of students in our district with special needs. There are other factors that impact the operating grant amount, such as our district's average teacher salary compared to the provincial average, and unique geographic factors such as weather, the size of schools and communities, and how geographically spread out our district is. The 2025 Ministry operating grant includes funding for 3% wage increases for unionized and non-unionized staff. The Ministry has advised districts that the 2025 funding rates incorporate wage increase funding only and do not include funding for increases in other costs districts may have experienced due to inflation. Other sources of operating revenue include grants from other ministries, lease revenue, investment income, and other miscellaneous revenue. Salaries and benefit costs comprise 88% of the district's operating costs and are budgeted at approximately 157 million for next year. These projections include a 3% funded pay increase, as well as increases in benefit rates. Operating services and supplies costs are projected to be about 21 million and make up 12% of the operating budget. As you can see, the majority of our costs are the people in the system. So when we're looking at reductions, it's not possible to keep all the reductions to supplies and services. The 157 million of salary costs in the operating fund are broken down by employee group as well. Teachers make up 53% of the operating salaries and benefits. 17% of salary costs are educational assistants, youth and childcare workers, and Indigenous education workers. 9% is principals and vice principals. 11% is support staff. Positions such as custodial, clerical, maintenance employees are included in that category. 7% is other professionals. Those include positions like the superintendent, secretary, treasurer, and other excluded staff. And 3% is substitute staff. As a side note, in addition to the operating fund costs, there are also approximately 16.5 million of wages and benefit costs in special purpose funds, including 10.4 million in teacher costs in the classroom enhancement fund. The operating fund service and supplies costs are budgeted at 21 million. Services costs are estimated at 4.9 million and include costs such as $500,000 ministry digital services fee, contracted services like snow clearing, software license fees, auditing, telephone, and photocopier usage charges. Services make up 23% of the operating services and supplies budget. Student transportation costs, which are mainly the contract for school transportation, is estimated at 5.9 million and are 27% of the operating services and supplies budget. Supplies, budgeted at 5 million, make up 23% of services and supplies costs and include things like classroom supplies, learning resources, library books, as well as the materials and supplies used by the facilities department to maintain and repair our buildings. Utilities, which includes the cost of heat and light in our buildings, are projected at 3.3 million and make up 15% of services and supplies costs. The remaining 12% of services and supplies are made up of staff professional development and travel, rentals and leases, insurance, and dues and fees. Another way to look at how operating dollars are spent is by function or category of expenses. The instruction function includes all programs related to the instruction of students, so includes the costs of all staff, services and supplies required to deliver regular instruction, library services, student counseling, special education programs, Indigenous education programs, and school administration costs. Instruction costs make up 79% of the operating budget and are estimated at 143.2 million. District administration includes the costs of all programs related to the Board of Education, district-level educational leadership and administration, as well as business, human resources, and labor relations activities. District administration costs make up 4% of the operating budget and are estimated at $6.9 million. Operations and maintenance includes the cost of operating and maintaining sites, buildings, furniture, equipment, and vehicles. Examples of costs include labor and supplies for custodial services, maintenance of buildings and grounds, and utility costs. Operations and maintenance costs make up 13% of operating costs and are estimated for next year at $22.5 million. Transportation and housing costs includes all costs related to the transportation and housing of students, and they make up 4% of operating costs and are estimated at $6 million. For the 2024-25 school year, operating expenses exceed revenues by $1.1 million. There are an additional $1 million of budgeted transfers to the capital fund for purchases of assets, including computers, equipment, and vehicles. Overall, there's a budgeted operating deficit of $2.1 million. The board is required under the School Act to approve a balanced budget by June 30th. And in order to address the deficit, there have been a number of reductions identified, which we will review next.
Thank you. So on the screen, you will see that we are going to move through what we are proposing as the 24-25 potential reductions. Again, all of these have been brought forward with the consideration of the lenses that we shared earlier around the 4 areas that we really wanted to have some scrutiny around. So for potential reductions, we have looked at our schools and a reduction in school administration positions to the number of 459,000. For all of our schools, a reduction to school budget allocations by $30 per student, which is to help offset some of the costs that previously were school spent, but now are centralized at district office, including items like custodial services and some of our computer services that we now provide centrally rather than at the school level. For our rural schools, we were proposing a reduction in the supplemental small rural school allocation to reflect the declining enrollment in those sites of $155,000. Our distance education program, we are looking to eliminate it. Although it is a cost neutral item, we believe that there may be some potential savings to be found there when we move forward. And this really came more about from the belief that we could provide to our students a higher quality program by using some of the expertise that exists outside of the district and by reallocating and utilizing some of the staff who provided distance education service to more essential school-based needs that we currently have. In the Indigenous Education Department, the elimination of a director position, which is currently vacant, is being proposed to the tune of $221,000. We currently have an assistant superintendent leading our Indigenous Education Department and providing very high levels of leadership and support. And again, this position will not have any negative outcomes for students or classrooms. In our district learning commons, a reduction in staffing, supplies, and services to the amount of $270,000. Our district learning commons is essentially a centrally located housed area for school-based resources, and I'm going to say some staff expertise as well. And we believe that we have some efficiencies that can be found there without, again, dramatically affecting schools and their overall operation. Cultural Performances Program. We'll be eliminating the budget allocation for staff to travel to Vancouver, typically to view the different performance options that exist. That costs us $20,000 for an allocation from Art Starts, which is essentially $29,000. And we believe that this review of programs and offerings to schools can be done online, just as it was done after COVID when we were not able to travel and see those kinds of performances live. Moving on, we have the Teacher Pro D Fund Administration. Currently, there's a half-time position to coordinate the distribution and approval of professional development funds for our teachers, and we are proposing eliminating that position to the tune of $67,000. At the Central Administration Office, coffee supplies, which currently total $7,000. In operations and maintenance, some staffing reductions overall that total $167,000. And we have set aside some reserves for technology for the renewal of infrastructure and some of those items that basically have a shelf life, like Wi-Fi hubs and switches within schools. But we believe that that reserve was in place for a rainy day, and essentially we're at that rainy day, and we feel now that we need to access those funds. And then finally, in student transportation, we have some staffing reductions that will allow us to save $14,000. All of those recommendations still leave us with a projected deficit of $303,000 that we will continue to look towards and try to figure out ways to access that. And we really want to make sure that, again, we are making these decisions and proposals with real due diligence and an understanding of what our operational needs are, and with the least impact to overall schools and classrooms. So I will turn the slides back to Secretary Treasurer Minnie-Barriott to take you through some of the details.
So previously we spoke about the difference in functions, the four instructions or the four functions that you see on your screen: instruction, district administration, operations and maintenance, and transportation and housing. So the first column shows the reductions that have been identified and highlighted on this previous slides. The second column is the annual budget expense to the particular function. So for example, instruction has cost reductions to balance of 1.5 million identified. The annual budget expense allocated is 143 million. The percentage of reductions in the instruction function is 1.06%. Similarly, for district administration, reductions of 187,000 compared to budget expense of 6.9 million, a reduction of 2.7%. Operations and maintenance, cost reductions identified of 219,000 compared to an allocation of 22.5 million, 0.97 or less than 1% has been identified from operations and maintenance, and a small amount to transportation and housing, resulting in a less than 0.5 or 0.23% of 1% for an overall reduction of 1.08% that has been identified to date.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer Minnie-Barriott. So in terms of next steps, there is a public survey on our website currently. It was opened earlier, and we already are receiving responses to that, and we would encourage anybody who is interested to please give us your feedback based on what is being proposed and your own sense of what our system needs are. The live stream, of course, is occurring today on April 23rd. The draft annual budget will be taken forward to the Business Committee meeting on May 14th, which is a closed meeting with staff and board. And then the review of the draft annual budget will occur at the Advisory Committee meeting, which is the week later, with our partner groups and stakeholders. And finally, the 24-25 annual budget bylaw will be passed at our regular board meeting. And at that point, the board will approve or not approve some of the recommendations that were brought forward, again, with the goal of ensuring that a balanced budget is submitted to the Ministry of Education and Childcare by the end of June, which is required by law. We want to thank you so much for your engagement with us this evening. We are hopeful that you have been provided with information that can allow you to provide us with feedback and certainly feel assured that we are making reductions where necessary in order to sustain an equitable school system for all of those across SD 57, both within Prince George and in our outlying communities. Again, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we wish you continued health and happiness, and we look forward to your engagement in future days. Thank you.
Thank you.